The rain had been falling for 3 days without mercy, transforming the Scottish Highlands into a landscape of mist and mud. Marguerite Brennan pulled her sodden cloak tighter and tried to ignore the ache in her swollen feet, the weight of her belly, and the cold certainty that she had nowhere left to go. 4 months widowed, 4 months pregnant. 4 months since cholera had taken her husband Thomas and left her with nothing but debts and a child who would be born into poverty unless she found shelter before winter claimed them both. The coaching inn had turned her away that morning. No rooms for unaccompanied women, the innkeeper had said, his eyes sliding away from her obvious condition. Especially not those who can't pay in advance. So Marguerite walked. The next village was 10 miles distant according to the milestone she'd passed an hour ago. 10 miles through rain that showed no signs of stopping, along a road that had turned to streams of mud. She was contemplating the very real possibility of death by exposure when she heard it. A horse's panicked whinny, followed by a man's sharp cry of pain. Marguerite rounded the bend and found chaos. A magnificent bay stallion, its coat dark with rain and fear sweat, stood with one leg held carefully off the ground. Beside it, a man lay in the mud, his face contorted with pain, one hand clutching his right leg. He was clearly a gentleman. His riding coat was of fine wool despite being filthy. His boots were custom-made, and there was an authority in his bearing even while injured. Dark hair plastered to his skull by rain, strong features tight with pain, eyes the color of storm clouds. "Sir!" Marguerite hurried forward as quickly as her bulk allowed. "Are you injured?" His eyes snapped to her, assessment and wariness warring in their depths. "My horse stepped in a rut, through me. I believe my leg is broken." Each word came through gritted teeth. Marguerite knelt in the mud beside him, ignoring the cold water soaking through her already drenched skirts. Her husband had been a physician before his death. She had assisted him countless times, had learned enough practical medicine to be dangerous or useful depending on circumstances. "May I examine it?" she asked. He studied her for a long moment, this bedraggled woman, with a pregnant belly and capable hands. Finally, he nodded. Marguerite worked quickly, her fingers gentle but thorough as she felt along his leg through the riding breeches. The break was clean. She could feel the displacement of bone just above the ankle. Painful, certainly, but not life-threatening if set properly. "It's broken," she confirmed, "but a clean fracture. It needs to be splinted and you need shelter immediately. Where is your home?" "Blackthorn Hall, 2 miles north." He gestured weakly up the road. "But I cannot walk." "No. But your horse can carry you if we can get you mounted." Marguerite looked at the stallion who was watching them with intelligent eyes. "What's his name?" "Tempest." "Fitting." She stood, approaching the horse with slow, steady movements. "Easy, Tempest. Your master needs you." The stallion allowed her to examine his leg, badly sprained but not broken. She found a length of cloth in the saddlebag and wrapped it firmly, providing support. Then she returned to the man. "I'm going to help you stand. It will hurt, but we must get you home before hypothermia sets in." "You know medicine," he said. "Not a question. My late husband was a physician. I was his assistant." She offered her hand. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. The maneuver was brutal for both of them. He was heavy with muscle and height, and Marguerite's pregnant body protested the strain. But between her determination and his stubbornness, they managed to get him upright, and then, with considerable effort, onto Tempest's back. "You'll guide us?" he asked, his face pale with pain. "I'll guide us." Marguerite took the reins, and they began the slow journey north. They barely spoke during the walk. The man, she still didn't know his name, focused on staying conscious and mounted. Marguerite focused on keeping her feet moving despite exhaustion that made her bones ache. When Blackthorn Hall finally emerged from the mist, Marguerite's breath caught. It was vast, a stone fortress that had stood for centuries, with towers that disappeared into the low clouds and windows that glowed with warm light. Gardens stretched in all directions, though the rain obscured their details. "What is this place?" she managed. "Home," the man said simply. Then, raising his voice with effort, "Malcolm!" A door burst open, An elderly man in butler's livery came rushing out, followed by 2 footmen with umbrellas. "Your Grace." The butler's shock was evident. "What happened?" "Your Grace." The title registered slowly through Marguerite's exhausted mind. This was not merely a wealthy gentleman. This was a duke. "Riding accident," the man, the duke, said. "Malcolm, this woman saved my life. See that she's given the best guest quarters and anything she requires." "Of course, Your Grace. But your leg? Send for Dr. Fraser immediately, and help me down before I fall." The next hour passed in a blur. Marguerite was swept into the warmth of Blackthorn Hall, handed over to a kind-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Kelso, who clucked disapprovingly at her sodden state and immediately ordered hot baths and dry clothing. "You're with child?" Mrs. Kelso said, not unkindly, as she helped Marguerite out of the wet garments. "How far along?" 4 months. Marguerite's teeth were chattering despite the fire roaring in the guest-room hearth. "And where is your husband?" "Dead. Cholera. 2 months ago." The words came automatically now, hollowed of emotion by repetition. Mrs. Kelso's expression softened. "Oh, you poor lass. Well, you're safe here now. His Grace is many things, but he's never turned away someone in need." After the bath, wrapped in a borrowed nightgown and dressing robe of extraordinary softness, Marguerite was given hot soup and bread. She ate mechanically, her body accepting nourishment, even as her mind struggled to process what had happened. She had sought shelter at a coaching inn and been turned away. Instead, she had found a duke lying in the mud with a broken leg, and now found herself in what appeared to be a palace. Fate, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Kelso entered, followed by a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and a physician's bag. "Mrs. Brennan, this is Dr. Fraser. His Grace has requested that he examine you to ensure neither you nor the babe suffered harm from your exertions today." Marguerite submitted to the examination with weary acceptance. Dr. Fraser was thorough but kind, his questions gentle, his touch professional. "You're exhausted and malnourished," he said finally, "but the child's heartbeat is strong. With proper rest and nutrition, you should both recover well." He paused. "You've had medical training yourself?" "I assisted my husband in his practice. His Grace mentioned you set his leg in the field. Competently, I might add. You likely saved him from permanent damage." Dr. Fraser smiled slightly. "You have skill, Mrs. Brennan. Don't let it go to waste." After he left, Marguerite lay in the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling. The room was more luxurious than any she'd ever inhabited. Thick carpets, velvet curtains, a fire that kept the cold at bay. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault. She should feel grateful. She did feel grateful. But she also felt the cold edge of reality pressing in. This was temporary. A night's shelter, perhaps 2, until the Duke recovered enough to make other arrangements. Then she would be back on the road, searching for work, for housing, for any way to survive until the baby came. She would not allow herself to hope for more. Hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. What Marguerite did not know was that, in his own chambers, the Duke of Blackthorn, Nathaniel Grey, 32 years old and isolated by choice for the past 5 years, was having similar thoughts. The woman who had appeared from the rain and saved him was unlike anyone he had encountered. Capable, intelligent, desperate, yet dignified. There was something in her eyes that recognized, the look of someone who had lost everything and was still standing, still fighting. It had been 5 years since the fire, 5 years since he had lost his brother, his sister-in-law, and their 2 young children in the blaze that consumed the East Wing. 5 years since he had withdrawn from society, turning Blackthorn Hall into a fortress of solitude. He had saved no one that night, had been in Edinburgh on business while his family burned. But today, lying in the mud with a broken leg and hypothermia creeping in, he had been saved by a pregnant widow who had every reason to keep walking and save herself instead. Nathaniel stared at the ceiling of his own chamber and wondered what exactly fate was trying to tell him. The rain did not stop. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. The roads became impassable. the river that separated Blackthorn Hall from the nearest village swollen and dangerous. Fraser made it back for one final check before the bridge became too risky to cross, pronouncing both Nathaniel's leg and Marguerite's health satisfactory before being stranded on the village side. "You're stuck here, I'm afraid," Mrs. Kelso told Marguerite on the 8th morning. "At least another week until the waters recede." Marguerite had expected to feel trapped. Instead, she felt something uncomfortably close to relief. Blackthorn Hall was warm, the food was plentiful, and for the first time in months, she was not constantly calculating whether she could afford another meal or another night's lodging. But she was also not the type of woman to accept charity without returning value. On the 3rd day, she approached Mrs. Kelso with a proposal. "I cannot simply eat your food and occupy your space without contributing," she said firmly. "Please let me help. I can organize. I can tend to minor illnesses. I can make myself useful." Mrs. Kelso had smiled. "His Grace said you'd say something of the sort. He's given permission for you to assist however you see fit. Though mind you don't overtax yourself." So Marguerite found purpose. She started with the stillroom, which had fallen into disarray after the previous housekeeper's retirement 2 years ago. Herbs were mixed together, labels had faded, preparations had spoiled. She spent 3 days sorting, discarding, and reorganizing, creating new labels in her careful script. When one of the scullery maids developed a fever, Marguerite prepared a tisane of willow bark and elderflower that brought it down within hours. When the head gardener complained of joint pain from the damp, she made a salve of arnica and comfrey that he swore was miraculous. Word spread through the household. The pregnant widow had the healing touch. It was on the 10th day that Nathaniel summoned her to the music room. Marguerite had not seen him since that first night, though Mrs. Kelso reported he was healing well, mobile with a crutch, conducting estate business from his study. She was nervous as she climbed the stairs to the west wing, her hand resting protectively on her belly. The music room was magnificent. High ceilings painted with celestial scenes, windows overlooking rain-soaked gardens, and in the center, a piano that gleamed like polished night. Nathaniel stood, or rather, leaned on his crutch, beside the instrument. He had changed from riding attire to formal dress, his dark hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. Without the pain and mud obscuring his features, Marguerite could see clearly how handsome he was. Strong jaw, intelligent eyes, the bearing of a man accustomed to command. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, inclining his head, "thank you for coming." "Your Grace." Marguerite curtsied, the movement awkward with her belly. "I wished to thank you properly. Dr. Fraser says that without your immediate intervention, my leg might have healed poorly, perhaps leaving me with permanent limitations. You have my gratitude. You've provided me shelter and safety. I believe we are even." Nathaniel's mouth quirked slightly. "Direct. I appreciate that." He gestured to a chair near the piano. "Please sit. I have a proposal for you." Marguerite sat, her heart beginning to race. A proposal. From a duke. Nothing about this could be good. "I've been informed," Nathaniel continued, settling into his own chair with visible care for his leg, "that you have been of considerable help to the household. Mrs. Kelso speaks very highly of your organizational skills and medical knowledge. The staff appreciate your tisanes and salves. I'm simply making myself useful. You're demonstrating considerable competence." He studied her. "Which brings me to my proposal. How long until your child is born?" 5 months, approximately. "And where will you go when the road's clear?" The question Marguerite had been avoiding. I will find employment, perhaps as a housekeeper or companion, somewhere that will allow a child." "And if you don't find such employment before the baby comes?" Marguerite's hands clenched in her lap. "I will manage." "Mrs. Brennan." Nathaniel's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not trying to distress you. I'm trying to offer you an alternative. Stay here, at Blackthorn Hall, through the birth and beyond." Marguerite's breath caught. As what?" "As the household's medical consultant and organizational supervisor. I'll pay you a fair salary, provide rooms for you and the child, and ensure you both have everything required. In return, You'll use your skills to improve the running of this house and care for the staff's health. It was too generous. Far too generous. Marguerite searched his face for hidden motivations, for the trap that surely existed beneath such an offer. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "You don't know me. I could be incompetent, dishonest, any manner of unsuitable. You saved my life when you could have kept walking and saved your own energy. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Brennan, I will be frank. This house has been difficult since I lost my family 5 years ago. The staff is loyal but aging. We need someone with your skills, and you need security. This arrangement serves us both." "What happened to your family?" The question escaped before Marguerite could stop it. Nathaniel's expression shuttered, pain flickering across his features before he controlled it. "Fire. The East Wing. My brother, his wife, and their 2 children. All lost." His voice was flat, controlled. "I was in Edinburgh on business. I returned to find half my house in ruins and everyone I loved dead." Marguerite's heart was constricted. She understood that particular pain. The guilt of surviving, of not being there when death came calling. "I'm sorry. As am I for your loss." He met her eyes. "We're both acquainted with grief, Mrs. Brennan. Perhaps that makes this arrangement more fitting than you realize. You're offering me a position, employment." "Yes. With the understanding that I may leave if I choose." "Of course. You're not a prisoner, merely an employee. Though I hope the terms will be comfortable enough that you'll choose to stay." Marguerite looked around the music room, at the piano, the paintings, the evidence of wealth and culture. Then she looked down at her worn hands, her borrowed dress, her swollen belly carrying a child who deserved better than she could currently provide. Pride was a luxury. Survival was a necessity. "I accept," she said. "With gratitude, Your Grace." Nathaniel's smile was small but genuine. "Excellent. Mrs. Kelso will help you settle into permanent quarters. And Mrs. Brennan, thank you." "For what?" "For saying yes, for staying, for—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "For bringing something to this house that's been missing for a very long time." "What's that?" "Life," Nathaniel said simply. "Blackthorn Hall has been a mausoleum for 5 years. Perhaps it's time it remembered how to breathe." Winter deepened over the Scottish Highlands, transforming Blackthorn Hall into an island of warmth in a frozen landscape. Marguerite settled into her new role with the efficiency that had always defined her. She reorganized the household stores, created a comprehensive system for medical supplies, and established regular health checks for the staff, particularly the older servants whose joints suffered in the cold. But it was the music room that became the unexpected center of her days. Nathaniel had taken to spending his afternoons there while his leg healed, claiming the light was better for reading a state correspondence. Marguerite suspected the truth was lonelier, that after 5 years of isolation, he was testing the waters of human companionship again, starting with someone who understood loss. She would find him there most days, seated near the windows with ledgers and letters, his crutch propped nearby. And she, completing her morning rounds through the household, would often end up there as well, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. It started with small conversations, the weather, the estate business, the health of the staff. Then on a particularly bitter afternoon 3 weeks after the arrangement began, Nathaniel asked, "Do you play?" Marguerite was organizing medical records at a small desk he'd had brought in for her use. She looked up. "Play?" "The piano." He gestured to the instrument that dominated the room, its surface gleaming with recent polish. "You're always looking at it." Marguerite hesitated. "I used to. My mother taught me. But it's been years, and I was never particularly skilled. Would you like to try?" "I couldn't possibly." "Mrs. Brennan." Nathaniel's voice was gently amused. "It's an instrument, not a holy relic. It was meant to be played. Please." Marguerite approached the piano with the reverence of someone handling something precious. She had not touched piano keys since her mother's death 7 years ago, had not allowed herself that particular grief. She sat, adjusted her position to accommodate her belly, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes were hesitant, a simple melody her mother had taught her as a child. But muscle memory took over, and soon she was playing with more confidence, the music filling the room with bitter-sweet beauty. When she finished, silence stretched for a long moment. Then Nathaniel said quietly, "You lied about not being skilled." "I'm not. You are. You show feelings in your playing. That matters more than technical perfection." He shifted in his chair. "Play something else, please." So she did, and it became a ritual. Most afternoons, after her household duties were complete, Marguerite would find her way to the music room. Sometimes she played while Nathaniel worked. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply existed in comfortable silence. She learned things about him in those quiet hours. That he had loved his brother deeply and carried crushing guilt for surviving when his family had not. That he had withdrawn from society, not from arrogance, but from an inability to bear the weight of sympathy and speculation. That he read philosophy and poetry but preferred agricultural journals. That he cared deeply for his tenants but struggled to show it. And he learned about her husband Thomas, who had died treating cholera patients despite knowing the risks. About her parents, both gone before she turned 20. About her fear that she would be a terrible mother because she had no model to follow. About the practical skills she'd learned assisting Thomas, and the deeper understanding of human suffering that came from watching him save some lives and fail to save others. "You would have liked him," Marguerite said one afternoon, her hands resting on silent keys. "Thomas. He was kind and brilliant, and completely impractical about money. He would treat patients who couldn't pay, would give away medicine we couldn't afford to replace. It's why we died in debt. He sounds like a good man." He was. But goodness doesn't pay rent or buy food. She looked down at her belly. "I loved him. But I'm angry at him too for leaving me alone with nothing. Is that terrible? It's human." Nathaniel set aside his correspondence. "I loved my brother. I'm also furious with him for keeping his family in the East Wing, despite knowing the fireplaces were old and potentially dangerous. I told him to move them. He said I was being paranoid." His jaw tightened. "He was wrong, and they paid for it. You can love someone and still be angry about their choices." "Yes." He met her eyes. "That's exactly it." The moment stretched between them, heavy with recognition. Two people who had loved and lost and survived, carrying guilt and grief in equal measure. Marguerite's hands found the keys again, playing a melody that was melancholy but not hopeless. Nathaniel listened, his usual rigid posture relaxing slightly. When she finished, he said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For understanding. For not offering empty platitudes about time healing all wounds or God's mysterious plans. Those platitudes aren't useful when you're drowning in grief." "No," he agreed. "They're not." As December turned to January, Nathaniel's leg healed enough that he could walk without the crutch, though he still moved with care. The household noticed the change in him. Not dramatic, but real. He smiled occasionally. He ate meals in the dining room instead of having trays sent to his study. He asked Mrs. Kelso about her grandchildren and actually listened to the answers. And always in the afternoons he was in the music room with Marguerite. It was inevitable, perhaps, that the comfortable companionship would shift into something more complicated. Marguerite tried to ignore it, the way her heart beat faster when she heard his footsteps approaching, the way she found herself choosing her words more carefully in his presence, the way she looked forward to those afternoon hours with an intensity that frightened her. She was pregnant with another man's child, a widow barely 4 months into mourning. She had no business feeling anything for Nathaniel Grey beyond gratitude and professional respect. But feelings, as she was discovering, did not follow the rules of propriety or sense. It was late January when everything changed. Marguerite had been at Blackthorn Hall for 2 months, her belly noticeably larger, her movements more careful. She was in the music room, playing a complex piece she'd been practicing for weeks, completely absorbed in the music. She didn't notice Nathaniel enter, didn't realize he was there until the final notes faded, and she heard him say, "Beautiful." Marguerite turned on the bench, startled. He stood just inside the door, his expression unguarded in a way she'd never seen. "I didn't hear you come in," she said. "You were lost in the music. I didn't want to interrupt." He crossed the room slowly. "Marguerite. May I call you Marguerite?" Her given name, spoken in his deep voice. "Yes, Marguerite." He seemed to test it. "I need to tell you something, and I'm not certain how to say it without crossing boundaries that perhaps should not be crossed." Her heart began to race. "Your Grace, Nathaniel, please, when we're alone, just Nathaniel, Nathaniel," she whispered. He sat beside her on the piano bench, closer than propriety allowed, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "These past 2 months, having you here, talking with you, listening to you play, it's been the first time since the fire that I've felt truly alive. Not just existing, but actually living." "I know what you mean." The words escaped before she could stop them. "I feel it too." His hand found hers on the piano keys. "I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's simply two lonely people finding comfort in companionship, or if it's—" He stopped, searching for words. "Something more," Marguerite finished. "Yes." They sat in silence, hands touching, the weight of unspoken feelings pressing down like the snow that had begun to fall outside. "I'm carrying another man's child," Marguerite said finally. "I'm in mourning. I have no family, no fortune, nothing to offer a duke except scandal and complications. And I'm a man who has hidden from the world for 5 years, who is barely learning how to be human again." Nathaniel turned her hand over, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "But Marguerite, I don't care about scandal or complications. I care that when you walk into a room the air feels less heavy. I care that your voice is the first thing I want to hear in the morning and the last thing at night. I care that you understand loss without trying to fix it, that you're strong without being hard, that you make this mausoleum feel like a home." "Nathaniel." Tears pricked her eyes. "I'm not asking you to love me. I know it's too soon that you loved your husband, that your heart is still tender. But I'm asking if you might be willing to consider, in time, if we might become something more than employer and employee, more than friends." Marguerite looked at their joined hands, his large and scarred from years of estate work, hers smaller and marked by medical preparations. Two broken people finding unexpected solace in each other. "I think," she said slowly, "that I've been falling for you since the day I found you in the mud, which is completely impractical and probably foolish and certainly inappropriate given my condition. But it's true." Nathaniel's breath caught. "You have?" "Yes. Though I told myself it was gratitude or pregnancy emotions or anything except what it actually was." She met his eyes. "I'm terrified, Nathaniel. I'm terrified of loving again and losing again. I'm terrified of ruining your reputation. I'm terrified that this feeling is real, and that makes it dangerous." "I'm terrified too," he admitted. "But perhaps we can be terrified together. Perhaps we can take this slowly, see where it leads, without pressure or expectations." "What does that look like?" "It looks like continuing what we're doing. Talking, playing music, getting to know each other. And when the baby comes—" He paused. "When the baby comes, we reassess. We decide together what the future holds." It was sensible, careful. The kind of plan that allowed for the reality that feelings could change, that circumstances might prove too complicated, that what felt right in the isolated bubble of Blackthorn Hall might not survive exposure to the wider world. But it was also hope. Real, tentative, fragile hope that perhaps second chances existed even for the broken. "All right," Marguerite said. "We take it slowly. We see what happens." Nathaniel smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Good. Now will you play something cheerful? I think we could both use it." So Marguerite played, and Nathaniel listened, and outside the music room, the snow continued to fall on Blackthorn Hall, covering the scars of old grief with the possibility of new beginnings. The months that followed established a rhythm that felt almost domestic in its intimacy. Marguerite's belly grew rounder as winter gave way to early spring. She continued her work managing the household's medical needs and organization, but now Nathaniel would often accompany her on rounds through the servants' quarters, learning the names of people who had served his family for decades, but whom he had barely acknowledged in 5 years of grief-induced isolation. "Mrs. Perth has been with us since I was a boy," he said one afternoon, after Marguerite had prepared a tonic for the elderly cook's persistent cough. "I didn't know her hands hurt her so badly." "She didn't want to complain," Marguerite replied, adding feverfew to her mortar. "Servants rarely do, especially to employers they respect." "But she told you." "I asked, and I listened." She ground the herbs steadily. "People will share their burdens if you make it safe to do so." Nathaniel watched her work with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're teaching me how to care for my own household." "I'm teaching you how to see the people in it as human rather than functions." She softened the words with a small smile. "Though you're learning remarkably quickly for a duke. I'm motivated." He moved closer, his hand coming to rest on the table beside hers. "My teacher is excellent." These small moments of connection multiplied as winter retreated, a touch of hands when passing items, standing close enough to feel each other's warmth. Conversations that stretched late into the evening, moving seamlessly from estate business to philosophy, to shared memories of the people they had loved and lost. But they were careful. Nathaniel never pressed for more than Marguerite seemed ready to give. Marguerite tried to ignore the growing intensity of her feelings, reminding herself that she was 6 months pregnant with another man's child, that her emotions were probably unreliable, that a duke and a penniless widow had no sensible future together. Then the letter arrived from Edinburgh, and everything became more complicated. It was early March when Malcolm brought the official-looking envelope to Nathaniel during breakfast. Marguerite noticed how his face went rigid as he read, how his knuckles whitened around the paper. "What is it?" she asked quietly. They were alone in the small dining room, where they had taken to sharing morning meals. "My late brother's business partner is claiming the estate owes him money, a significant sum, allegedly for investments made on behalf of Blackthorn Hall." Nathaniel's voice was controlled, but Marguerite heard the anger beneath. "He's threatening legal action if payment isn't made within 60 days. Is the debt legitimate? I don't know. My brother handled the estate's investments while I managed the agricultural side. After his death, I discovered his records were incomplete. There are gaps, missing documents." He set down the letter with deliberate care. "Martin Corbett has been circling since the fire, suggesting there were agreements I'm not aware of. This is his most aggressive move yet." "What does he want?" "Money, access to estate records, perhaps more." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He was questioned after the fire. There were suspicions about how it started. "Nothing was ever proven, but I've always wondered." Marguerite felt cold understanding wash over her. "You think he might have been involved?" "I think he stood to gain from my brother's death. I think he's now trying to extract payment for debts that may or may not exist." Nathaniel stood, pacing with barely controlled energy. "I need to go to Edinburgh, meet with solicitors, review what records do exist, and deal with Corbett directly." "How long will you be gone?" "A week. Perhaps 2 if matters are complicated." He stopped pacing, turning to face her. "Marguerite, I hate leaving you, especially with the baby due in less than 3 months. I'll be fine. Mrs. Kelso will look after me, and Dr. Fraser is only an hour away if needed." "That's not what I meant." He crossed to her, taking her hands. "I hate leaving you because I'll miss you. Because these past months, having you here, talking with you every day, it's become the center of everything. And the thought of weeks without seeing you, without hearing you play, without our conversations." He stopped, seeming to recognize he was revealing more than he'd intended. But Marguerite squeezed his hands, her heart full of feelings she was finally ready to name. "I'll miss you too," she said. "More than is probably wise. More than I should, given everything." "When I return," Nathaniel began, but she pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping him. "When you return, we'll talk. About everything. About what this is between us and what it might become. But now you need to focus on protecting your estate and dealing with this threat." She managed a smile despite the ache in her chest. "Go fight your battles, Your Grace. I'll be here when you return." He kissed her forehead, a gentle, lingering touch that spoke of things neither of them had quite said aloud. Then he was gone, taking a carriage to Edinburgh that same afternoon, leaving Marguerite to realize just how much space one man's absence could create. The days without Nathaniel stretched long and empty despite her full schedule of household duties. Marguerite threw herself into work, reorganizing the entire stillroom, creating a comprehensive medical manual for future reference, even beginning to catalogue the extensive music library in the music room. Anything to keep her mind occupied and away from thoughts of Edinburgh, of legal threats, of the man whose presence she had not realized had become essential to her happiness. She was 7 months pregnant now, her movements increasingly awkward, her back a constant ache. Mrs. Kelso fussed over her like a mother hen, insisting she rest more, work less, take better care of herself. "You'll wear yourself to nothing," the housekeeper scolded one afternoon, finding Marguerite on a ladder reaching for high shelves in the music library. "I'm fine," Marguerite began, then gasped as pain shot through her lower back. She clutched the ladder, breathing through it. "Down. Now." Mrs. Kelso's tone brooked no argument. "To your rooms, and I'm sending for Dr. Fraser." "It's just my back. It's 7 months of pregnancy plus too much work and worry over his grace. You'll rest, or I'll have the footmen carry you to bed themselves." Dr. Fraser arrived that evening, examined her thoroughly, and delivered a verdict that was both reassuring and frustrating. "The baby is fine. You, however, are exhausted. Complete bed rest for at least 3 days. Light activity only after that. And stop trying to organize an entire castle while heavily pregnant." So Marguerite found herself confined to her rooms, watching spring attempt to establish itself over the Scottish Highlands through her window. Mrs. Kelso brought meals on trays, sat with her for company, and provided updates on household matters that Marguerite was not to worry about, but worried about anyway. It was on the 4th day of her enforced rest that a different visitor appeared. Malcolm entered carrying a letter with Nathaniel's seal, his expression carefully neutral. "This arrived by express courier, ma'am. His Grace asked that it be delivered to you immediately." Marguerite's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. The letter was several pages long, written in Nathaniel's strong, clear hand. "Dearest Marguerite, I hope this letter finds you well, and that you are not working too hard in my absence. Knowing you, I suspect Mrs. Kelso is engaged in a constant battle to keep you from climbing ladders and reorganizing entire wings of the house while 7 months pregnant. Please, for my peace of mind, if not your own, rest. Edinburgh has been as complicated as I feared. Corbett's claims are partially legitimate. My brother did make investments on the estate's behalf, though whether they were wise investments is another matter. However, there are also clear signs of manipulation in the records. Numbers that don't quite align. Documents that appear to have been altered. My solicitors are building a case for fraud, but it will take time. The legal battle aside, being here has clarified something for me. These past 5 years, I've been hiding at Blackthorn Hall, telling myself I was protecting what remained of my family legacy. But I was actually just afraid. Afraid of moving forward, of letting go of grief, of allowing myself to feel anything beyond the safe numbness of isolation. You changed that. From the moment you appeared in that storm and helped me despite your own desperate circumstances, you've been teaching me how to live again, how to care about people instead of just managing them, how to find joy in small moments, a piece of music, a conversation, the simple pleasure of companionship. I don't know what your feelings are. I don't know if what I feel for you is returned, or if I'm simply a convenient refuge in your own grief and displacement. But I need you to know, I love you, Marguerite. Not because you're here, not because you're useful, not because you saved my life or reorganized my household. I love you because you make me want to be better than I am, because your strength humbles me, because your kindness in the face of your own suffering reminds me what actual courage looks like. I love your child as well, though I've never met them, because they're part of you, and anything that is part of you is precious to me. When I return, and I will return as soon as this legal mess is resolved, I intend to court you properly. With your permission, of course. I intend to ask you, when the baby is born and you've had time to recover, if you would consider becoming my wife. Not my employee, not my companion, my wife, my duchess, my partner, in rebuilding a life I thought I'd lost forever. I understand if your answer is no. I understand if this is too much, too soon, too complicated, but I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that what I feel is real and lasting, not some temporary infatuation or convenience. Take care of yourself. Take care of our child. Yes, I already think of them as ours. And know that every moment I'm away, I'm thinking of you and counting the days until I can return to Blackthorn Hall and to the woman who saved my life in more ways than one. Yours, Nathaniel. Marguerite read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. By the 3rd reading, she wasn't sure if she was crying from joy or fear, or the overwhelming weight of being loved so completely and having to decide if she was brave enough to love back. She had loved Thomas. She still loved his memory, and still mourned what they might have had together. But Thomas was gone, and the child growing inside her needed a future, not just a past. And Nathaniel. Nathaniel had somehow become the person she looked for first in any room. The one whose opinion mattered, whose smile could transform an entire day, whose presence had made an unfamiliar castle feel more like home than anywhere she'd lived in years. She loved him. She had probably loved him since he'd offered her not just shelter, but dignity, not just employment, but respect. She loved his slowly emerging capacity for warmth, his fierce protectiveness of those he cared about, his willingness to be vulnerable despite years of armor. But love didn't make the complications disappear. She was still a widow with no family connections. He was still a duke with social obligations and expectations. Their union would raise eyebrows, provoke gossip, possibly damage his standing among peers who valued breeding and status above all else. Could she do that to him? Could she be selfish enough to accept his love knowing it might cost him socially? The baby chose that moment to kick vigorously, as if offering an opinion on the matter. Marguerite placed her hand on her belly and felt the strong, insistent movements of a child who wanted to live, to thrive, to have a future. "All right," she whispered. "All right. We'll be brave. We'll say yes. If he truly wants us, if he's willing to face whatever comes, then we'll be brave enough to say yes." She took up her pen and wrote her own letter, shorter than his but no less heartfelt, telling him yes, she loved him. Yes, she would court him. Yes, she would marry him when the time was right. She gave it to Malcolm to send express, imagining Nathaniel's face when he received it, and allowed herself to hope. Nathaniel returned to Blackthorn Hall on a bright April morning when Marguerite was 8 months pregnant and feeling like an overripe fruit ready to burst. She was in the music room. Where else? Attempting to play despite the awkwardness of reaching around her enormous belly when she heard carriage wheels on gravel. She abandoned the piano and hurried to the window as quickly as her bulk allowed. There he was, stepping out of the carriage, looking tired and travel-worn, but whole. And when he looked up at the window and saw her, his entire face transformed with joy so pure it stole her breath. She met him at the entrance hall, propriety forgotten, moving as quickly as she could. Nathaniel took the stairs 2 at a time, despite Malcolm's protests about proper greetings, and then they were face to face, breathing hard, staring at each other with the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with the physical and everything to do with the soul. "You're huge," he said, then immediately looked horrified. "I mean, you look beautiful. Marguerite laughed, the sound bubbling up from depths she'd forgotten existed. "I am huge. I'm 8 months pregnant with a baby who seems determined to be born the size of a small boulder." "You look perfect." Nathaniel's hands came up as if to touch her belly, then hesitated. "May I?" In answer, Marguerite took his hands and placed them on her stomach. The baby, as if performing on cue, delivered a strong kick directly into Nathaniel's palm. His expression was wonder incarnate. That's a person, a whole person in there. A very active person who enjoys using my ribs as a kicking target. She covered his hands with hers. "Nathaniel, I got your letter. I got yours." His eyes met hers. "Did you mean it? Every word, did you? Every syllable?" They stood there in the entrance hall, hands joined over her pregnant belly, the household staff tactfully disappearing, until Marguerite said, Perhaps we should have this conversation somewhere more private. So they retreated to the music room, their room, where so many important conversations had already occurred. Nathaniel settled her into the most comfortable chair, brought cushions for her back, and only then did he sit, taking her hands again. "The legal situation is resolved," he said. "Corbett's claims were fraudulent. My solicitors found proof he'd altered documents. He's facing charges for attempted fraud. The estate is secure. I'm glad. But more importantly," Nathaniel took a breath, seeming to gather courage. "Marguerite, I meant what I wrote. I love you. I want to marry you. But I need you to understand what that means. You'll be a duchess, which comes with social obligations and scrutiny. People will talk. They'll say I married beneath myself, that you trapped me, that the child isn't mine. Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to defend us?" Marguerite countered. "Because I can bear gossip, Nathaniel. But I won't marry you if you're going to be ashamed of me when society judges us. I could never be ashamed of you." His voice was fierce. "I'm in awe of you. And anyone who has something to say about our marriage can say it to my face and then find themselves uninvited from every social event I have any influence over. That's rather ruthless. I learned from the best. You're remarkably ruthless when it comes to protecting people you care about. I've watched you demolish servants' complaints with pure logic, reorganize entire systems that weren't working, and tell Mrs. Kelso that her famous seed cake needed more salt." He smiled. "You're gentle, but you're not soft. And I love that about you." Marguerite felt tears threaten again. She'd been crying at the smallest provocation for weeks, something she attributed to pregnancy, but suspected had more to do with accumulated emotion. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I'm terrified of loving you and losing you. I'm terrified the baby will come between us. I'm terrified I'll fail at being a duchess, because I don't know how to be anything except myself." "Then be yourself. That's all I want." Nathaniel slid from his chair to kneel before her, awkward, given her belly, but managing it anyway. "Marguerite Brennan, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to your child? Will you help me turn Blackthorn Hall back into a home instead of a mausoleum? Will you teach me how to live instead of just existing?" "Yes." The word came out choked. "Yes to all of it." He kissed her then, careful of her belly, his lips warm and gentle and full of promise. It was Marguerite's first kiss since Thomas died, and it felt like both an ending and a beginning, the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. When they pulled apart, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "When shall we marry?" "After the baby is born. After I've recovered. I want to walk down an aisle without looking like I might give birth mid-ceremony." Practical as always. He smiled. 3 months then. 4. 3 sounds right. So they had a plan. They would wait until the baby came, until Marguerite's body healed, and then they would marry with proper ceremony and celebration. In the meantime, they would simply be together, talking, planning, preparing for the arrival of a child who would be born into more love than Marguerite had ever dreamed possible. The baby, a girl with a powerful set of lungs and her mother's dark hair, arrived 3 weeks later on a stormy May night that reminded Marguerite powerfully of that first storm when she'd found Nathaniel in the mud. Dr. Fraser attended, along with an experienced midwife from the village, and Mrs. Kelso, who held Marguerite's hand through the worst of it. Nathaniel paced the corridor outside, Mrs. Kelso reported later with amusement, wearing a path in the carpet and driving Malcolm to distraction with his demands for updates. When the baby's first cry pierced the air, Nathaniel nearly broke down the door trying to get in. Dr. Fraser had to physically block him until Marguerite was made presentable, which sent the midwife into scandalized muttering about dukes with no sense of propriety. But when Nathaniel finally entered the room, his expression transformed every protocol violation into insignificance. He knelt beside the bed where Marguerite lay exhausted but glowing, and looked at the small bundle in her arms with something approaching reverence. "A daughter," Marguerite said, her voice hoarse. "We have a daughter." "May I?" Nathaniel asked, hands already reaching. Marguerite placed the baby in his arms and watched as the Duke of Blackthorn, a man who had spent 5 years in frozen grief, held her daughter with infinite tenderness and promptly burst into tears. She's perfect, he managed between sobs. Marguerite. She's absolutely perfect. She is, isn't she? Marguerite felt her own tears flowing. What shall we call her? Nathaniel looked at the baby, then at Marguerite, then back at the impossibly small person in his arms. Hope, he said. Because that's what she represents. Hope that life continues, that love is possible, that the future can be better than the past. Hope Brennan Grey, Marguerite said. It's beautiful. Hope Grey, Nathaniel corrected gently. If you'll allow it. I want to adopt her formally, make her mine-in-law as well as heart. Our daughter, not just yours. Marguerite's throat closed with emotion. You're certain? I have never been more certain of anything. He carefully returned Hope to Marguerite's arms, then sat on the edge of the bed, gathering them both into a protective embrace. You saved my life in that storm, Marguerite. Both of you did, in different ways. This child, our child, represents everything I thought I'd lost forever. The chance to be a father, the chance to build a family, the chance to love without fear. They remained that way for a long time, the three of them, while outside the storm that had marked Hope's arrival began to clear. Mrs. Kelso peeked in eventually, smiled at the scene, and quietly withdrew, already planning the celebration feast that would mark not just a birth, but a true homecoming for Blackthorn Hall. 3 months later, on a perfect August day when the Scottish Highlands were ablaze with heather and the sky was impossibly blue, Marguerite Brennan married Nathaniel Grey in the small stone kirk that had served the Blackthorn estate for 3 centuries. Hope, 3 months old and already demonstrating a powerful personality, was held by Mrs. Kelso in the front pew, occasionally providing musical commentary that made the congregation smile. Marguerite wore a gown of pale blue silk that Mrs. Kelso and 3 local seamstresses had labored over for weeks. Nathaniel wore formal attire but couldn't stop grinning, which rather ruined his ducal dignity, but made him infinitely more human. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the minister asked if anyone objected, there was only supportive silence. When Nathaniel promised to love, honor, and cherish, his voice was strong and certain. When Marguerite made the same promises, she meant every word, with every fiber of her being. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nathaniel kissed her with a thoroughness that bordered on scandalous, and sent Hope into a fit of giggles, as if she approved of her parents' devotion. The celebration afterward was a true community event. Every tenant farmer, every household servant, every villager who had watched the Duke's slow emergence from grief attended. There was music and dancing, abundant food, and enough whiskey to ensure the celebration would be remembered, or perhaps not remembered, depending on how much one had imbibed. But the moment Marguerite treasured most came late in the evening. She and Nathaniel had slipped away from the festivities, retreating to the music room that had been the crucible of their relationship. Hope was asleep in her arms, exhausted from all the attention. Nathaniel stood at the window, looking out at Blackthorn Hall's grounds lit by torches and celebration. Marguerite joined him, and he wrapped his arm around her, drawing both her and Hope close. 5 years ago, he said quietly, I stood in this room and wanted to die. The fire had taken everyone I loved, and I didn't see a reason to continue. I just went through motions, day after day, managing an estate I no longer cared about, living in a house that felt like a tomb. And now? Marguerite asked. Now I stand here with my wife and daughter, listening to our household celebrating below, and I'm so grateful I survived. Because if I hadn't, I would never have found you in that storm. I would never have experienced this feeling, this overwhelming, terrifying, wonderful feeling of being completely, perfectly happy. Marguerite leaned into him, Hope making small sleeping sounds between them. I spent so many months after Thomas died feeling like my life was over, like I was just waiting to die too, slowly, of poverty or childbirth or simple despair. The night I found you, I had given up hoping for anything except survival. And now? Now I have everything. A home, a husband who sees me as an equal, a daughter who will grow up surrounded by love and security. She lifted her face to look at him. You gave me back my life, Nathaniel. You gave both of us a future. You gave me back mine, he countered. We saved each other, Marguerite. That's what love does. It saves us from the darkness and reminds us that light still exists. They stood together at the window, watching the celebrations continue below, while hope slept peacefully between them. The storm that had brought them together was long past. Now there was only warmth and light, and the sound of Blackthorn Hall remembering how to laugh. Marguerite had sought help from a stranger and discovered a duke. But more than that, she had discovered that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best ones. That love could bloom even in the coldest winter. That family wasn't just blood, but choice, commitment, and the daily work of showing up for each other. She had arrived at Blackthorn Hall with nothing but a child in her womb and desperation in her heart. She had found purpose, partnership, and a love deeper than anything she'd imagined possible. And as Nathaniel kissed her forehead while hope stirred between them, Marguerite knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Not despite the storm that had brought her here, but because of it. Sometimes, she thought, fate disguises salvation as disaster. Sometimes, the worst day of your life is actually the first day of something better. And sometimes, when you think you're at the end, you're actually just at the beginning.